So there's been a couple of special topics I wanted to touch on. I have two reviews up now. The third review is going to go up pretty soon. And from that, there's been a lot of great discussion and a few topics that I thought were interesting that didn't really fit into being pushed into one of those, particular reviews. And there's just some, channel news and some information about where this channel is going that I thought would be interesting to quickly touch on too. So this is a video I'm just going to call feedback for the time being, and it'll relate to those special topics. It'll relate to channel news, like a vlog, except it's not going to have the word vlog in it because that's a stupid word. So anyway, the big thing I wanted to touch on is, again, there's been a couple of reviews up, there's been a lot of discussion, but one thing that I haven't really been able to discuss or kind of put as a disclaimer in front of these videos is why these elements that might be bad or might be not perfect in games, why they are that way. And I think it's important to remember that game development, design, all of these different things are a part of the creative process, right? You're creating something from nothing. And with that, I mean, you're creating something from nothing. So a lot of times you don't have necessarily something to look at. There's not a right answer or a wrong answer. It's a very iterative process. So that's important to remember. I think that it's really important to remember that design is hard. Graphic design, industrial design, game design, development, all of these different things, and specifically game design and development, that whole process is hard. You're working with a lot of people. There's a lot of really smart people and a lot of different things happening all at once, a lot of different things coming together. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one is, with game development, things are always changing, right? The feature set is changing. You might stumble across something that it works great or isn't working, and add it or scrap it. So along with that, the HUD, the UI, a lot of these elements have to come kind of after that fact. I mean, you're not developing game features based on the UI. I mean, you might. That could be an interesting game. Could be an interesting process. But generally, no, right? You have this idea. You're making whatever, and the point of the HUD and the UI is to display that data to the player. So a lot of times, the UI and HUD are the last thing to get locked down. So there's probably most definitely an element of rush to that. And within that design process, you have a lot of different voices, right? You have managers who are, trying to keep track of time, keep things on schedule. You have other designers and other developers who might have their own ideas about how something should work. You have, in design, you have clients. You just have all these different voices. A lot of them are smart people, and they're all coming together. And that could definitely affect things or derail things or just add challenge to the situation. This last week's episode of Giant Bomb featured the developer Dave Lang, and there was a really great discussion that started around the 34-minute mark. This was the March 18th Giant Bombcast. And I was right around 34 minutes, I think. And there's just maybe like a 10-minute discussion talking about kind of the inner workings of development. And he specifically goes off in this way about making some gameplay decisions. And they also specifically touch on the HUD and UI and different elements. And it's really interesting. You should definitely go listen to it. But in that, he's even talking about the arguments that arise out of these different situations, specifically the number of key presses or clicks it takes to maybe get to some certain area. And then they talk about how, in the end, reviews don't actually really care. Nobody's actually talking about that, even though it was an argument and people got super heated for a month or whatever. But anyway, that is to just say that there are people who care about this. Like, in the end, things might not be perfect. Things might even be bad. But people worked on this. People cared about it, most likely. Sometimes it might not be the case. But in the end, there was some creativity. There was some thought process to go into this. And that is not to say that they are above critique, right? Like a professional critique is all about nothing can ever be perfect. You're always looking for ways to make it better. It's just something to keep in mind that a lot of times when we're looking at these games and there's something that doesn't quite make sense, who knows what could be the reason? It doesn't mean that someone overlooked it. Someone very well might have overlooked it, but it could have been a time constraint. It could have been publishers pushing. It could have been a lack of money. It could have been because some feature changed or was cut or was implemented at the last second. Any number of things. So just an interesting way to kind of look at that whole situation. And while we're on this topic of kind of equating the design field with the game development field. I think that there's another issue that's been happening a lot lately. There's been a lot of discussion on the internet about these sorts of downgrades in games. If you look at Watch Dogs, a lot of Ubisoft games, actually, the big thing was Watch Dogs, and there was some talk about Dark Souls 2 and the lighting being downgraded to and all of that. And there's a general sense that people feel like they're being deceived, whether intentionally or not. I think there's a fear that they are intentionally being deceived. Although I do think that there's a lot of people too who realize that. So, all right, let me back up. So basically, I think what's happening here is that, and we see it a lot in the design field too, whenever we're about to present something to a client, a lot of work goes into the presentation. And the point of that is because you have to make assumptions for the lowest common denominator. You have to make assumptions that you have to be afraid, I guess, that if there's a specific color you've chosen, that you don't want that color, whether a person has like a specific hatred or love to that color, to kind of derail everything else. Because things like that can be changed, right? There's so many different elements and parts, especially in visual fields, that make up something that people can really end up focusing, whether they know it or not, on one little aspect. And just draw all their attention to that, and that can definitely derail everything. So when you're preparing for a presentation, a lot of time has to be spent kind of making sure the presentation is perfect. And that's very similar to what these vertical slices are in game development, is you want it all to appear perfect, because if something looks bad, and it might not be bad. It might be just part of the development process. There's, again, any number of reasons why, but you just want to go out on the right foot. Right. So I think the problem is that usually these vertical slices are shown at things like GDC or E3 at these expos. And even at E3, I would argue that in the end, especially maybe 5-10 years ago, before the internet and social media were at the point that they are now with the gaming community, the expected end user, the expected viewer of these sorts of presentations wasn't as much the gamers, the consumers who are buying the products. They were to the industry that kind of relays that information to the consumer. And now you can argue that industry, the reviewers and everything like that, are becoming less and less important. And because of social media and everything, the end consumers, us, the players, are seeking out and want to see these sorts of things. But I just think developers and publishers haven't caught up to knowing that hey, everyone, our end users, our customers, our players, the actual game players are the ones who are seeking this out and seeing this now. And we need to be more transparent in what we're showing, and at least say like, hey, we're trying to make this look as classed up and professional as we possibly can. And there's reasons for that, but it's all about communication. And again, I think that what the publishers and developers have previously seen these expos as is different because of the availability to us that these videos have now. It's not going to be seen by reviewers first, who kind of understand the process a little bit, and then relay that to the players. Like in the end, it's us who see it first. We don't need that necessarily middleman. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think personally, I definitely don't think that there's an intentional, deceit coming from the publishers. They just want to make everything look as best they can. And then, obviously the other thing to keep in mind too is that, especially with Watch Dogs and these sorts of things, like they were developing for next-gen platforms. Absolutely. Watch Dogs was a new IP. They very much wanted it to kind of be the next-gen thing. And I seriously doubt that they had everything locked down for, I don't know what the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were going to be like at that time. I mean, I'm not sure how late in the game different things were changing for those consoles, but to the developers, you never know. And you're just going to want to go out with your best foot forward. So to talk about the channel overall really quickly, there's a bunch of new stuff I want to try. I feel like even after just 2 reviews, there's a few things I've learned specifically about how I want to take that series kind of. I'm really excited people are actually interested in these sorts of discussions. So thank you for watching and listening. I think the Titanfall review failed in a lot of ways. I think it was too long. I think it should be maybe half that length. I don't think I ever want to go over 8 minutes for a review again, because honestly, at that point, it becomes more nitpicking, and I'm getting away from the major points. And that's just, I think that's less interesting, and I also think there's a lack of focus then. I also think that it was balanced a little poorly. I think that the positive things I had to say about it came near the end, and that's not to say that everything has to be balanced and have an equal amount of positives and negatives. I definitely felt like overall the Titanfall UI and those sorts of things fell flat compared to the gameplay, especially. But I do think that I did a poor job of balancing why those reasons were and what was working well, because there were definitely a few things that worked well there. So, a couple things I've learned, and something to look for in the next reviews, especially the infamous review coming up. Other than that, a couple of other video series I want to try. This is one of them. The reviews have been very edited and very specific. I write them out first. I play the game. I write, I rewrite, I record, I chop up and edit and re-record, and have my points and things laid out first, just because I think that makes more sense for what I'm trying to achieve with those, and I think it makes it easier to digest, honestly, those kinds of points, since they are so mechanical in nature. This video in particular is very much there's a lot more us, for one, but stream of consciousness, and maybe you like that, maybe you don't. You can tell me what you think. It's definitely easier to edit and produce, that's for sure. But again, I'm just going off topic here, kind of ranting. This is kind of what I intended for this series, just to do something a little more fun and just whatever. So that's, those are my intentions for how reviews are going to go in the future, the next few. The next big one will be Watch Dogs. In between Watch Dogs, obviously we have a couple of months to go, so any suggestions you have, I'll look at them. I have a couple of ideas too. I might take a look at the Arkham series overall and see how that evolution went. Maybe when Dark Souls 2 comes out on PC, I'll look at Dark Souls 1 to 2. I don't have a PS3 right now available, so I wouldn't be able to look at the entire Soul series, aside from grabbing some screenshots and kind of talking about that. But, those are a couple of ideas. Anyway, I think this basically wraps it up. So what I wanted to talk about now, so thank you for listening, and I'll chat soon.